All right, today we're going to be going over the IT change request form. Now, this can be used in many scenarios where you have kind of a standard configuration, a baseline configuration that either you're setting up your IT assets for at the various levels, right? Those endpoints, your network. And so you can have this basic standard configuration established, or at least you should have a baseline configuration established. And depending on the operations of the business, you may find that there's instances where you need to deviate from this standard. And so when this comes up, you want to make sure that you're documenting this change, right? So one, you want to make sure that it's approved because it's something that is not in compliance with what your standard guidelines are that you're establishing for your organization, so that you don't want to just have somebody out there saying, I want this, and then all of a sudden those standards don't mean anything because there's no baseline or requirements that are holding anybody to that. So this change request form helps you put some governance steps into place for that. Organizations that you may be working with or are a part of may actually have some type of automated solution that they're doing their change management processes for. So obviously in those instances, you're not going to use this form, which is available here, but obviously you can start to look at this form, look at all the fields that are available, and then start to mirror that up to any automated processes you may be implementing or already have implemented to ensure that you have the proper governance over this change management process. So some of the sections in here, you're just going to want to make sure that somewhere within that automated workflow, if you're establishing it and not using this form, that those steps are still accounted for. So let's get right into it here. We have your standard change request form. You can see here in section A to be filled out by the actual change requester. So we're identifying who is actually requesting this change, who they report to, and then the subject. Obviously giving them a chance to provide a description, understanding why they need this change, what operational workflows are requiring this change, what benefits this change is going to have for their business workstations and their kind of responsibilities. So expected time to complete, this is just going to be a wish list for that resource or that requester for this change. Section B here is going to be filled out by their manager, so it's approved. So we know that, it's not just every resource is going to be putting in requests and it's not going to have some management oversight. We need all of this to be approved by formal management within the organization. So that is going to be either approved or denied straight out of the gate from that reporting manager. Next, you're going to get into section C here to be filled out by that IT manager, depending on the size and scope of the organization. Maybe you have a project manager that's tracking all of this. You're going to have a tracking ID, some way to associate an ID or tracking number specifically to this change request. Start identifying that change type. Is it kind of routine? Is it emergency? Is it really causing problems for the organization? Change category, is it in-house? Is there some type of vendor software release, hardware? Where does this change category come into place? How many people are going to need to be involved there? From a change status, is this pending approval, scheduled, under review, or closed? So you can track the status of this change. All of the assets impacted. So if this is going to have a large impact or a limited scope and limited impact on the organization, understanding what assets and operations this is going to impact. Submitted date and time. And then obviously starting to get into some of these aspects from a project management, IT management standpoint, understanding the urgency, the coverage of this, the impact it's going to have on the organization, and then the overarching priority. Don't forget to understand and estimate your effort in this, right? You need to make sure that you're communicating to your management, to your bosses, the amount of effort that this is going to take and the priority that they're establishing for this so that they understand where your efforts are going and what you're not going to be able to accomplish by now taking this on. So a risk assessment or an impact assessment, possibly both. So, what risk is this new workflow going to pose to the organization? What risk is this deviation to those standard configurations? Is this going to present to the organization, right? So those things need to be accounted for or understood in taking a look at these change requests. The impact that it has for the organization. So the positive or negative impact that it's going to have on the business, taking this into place. All of those controls and aspects that we need to account for when looking at these change requests. So that overarching impact. Section E here is we're getting into kind of a checklist to be filled out by senior management if necessary, that they're review the risk assessment, impact assessment. So, maybe this is all done by the same person. Maybe there's a project manager filling this out, and then it goes to that IT manager for final approval, that they're reviewing all of these aspects. The change is then either formally approved or denied with associated comments on why maybe that was denied. Section F can be filled out by, again, that IT manager, understanding what implementation team is going to need to be pinged to start and take on this project. The scheduled date and time for the project, when they're going to be able to get to it, timelines based on level of effort, things of that nature. Service disruption. So that disruption notice, right? Are any services going to have to be taken down while this change occurs? Are you going to have to take servers offline, take applications or solutions offline in order to implement this change? Who needs to be notified if that is going to actually take place? And then the tasks assigned for each team member. So then you can really get into some of the project management aspects for the implementation team here in section G. You can see, so those task numbers, the descriptions, any backup plans that may need to be associated to this, implementation plans, rollback plans that need to be accounted for with this change. And then the change result at the end, right? Once all of these tasks are gone through, once it is implemented, is the change result successful? Is it with errors? Is it failed? And then were any services or applications unexpectedly impacted? So if you were not accounting for services to be impacted or have to take any applications offline, but once you got into this project and you realized that that wasn't the case, and certain services were going to have to be unavailable for a period of time to ensure this request, documenting that after the fact so that we can account for those things going forward. Is the asset list updated to reflect any new changes? So making sure your asset inventory is updated, your data classifications, all of those components, making sure that you have proper governance over these changes for the long haul. Was there any deviation from the implementation plan? So did you have to make adjustments as you went through it? Section I for emergency change only. So you may run into instances where it is an emergency to make a change, and you're going to streamline your change management processes in order to get that implemented. So here you can provide some justification, at least have some type of documentation on this emergency change that needed to take place. What was it necessary to perform this change on the emergency basis, providing that justification. Could it have been avoided? So this type of change doesn't have to become an emergency change in the future. Was it approved by the IT manager? Any IT team comments that had to go through that emergency change? So you can see it's much shorter in the emergency, but you still want to have some type of documentation, justification, and reasoning to push something through an emergency perspective. So this is going to be your IT change request form, all of the steps that can go through it as you grow, as you scale as an IT organization. You're going to find ways to automate this. Just make sure that all of these points that we covered in this form actually make it into your automated process.